This is Resident Evil 4, but everything is randomized. Enemies, item locations, items the merchant sells, and even the starting gear. Our starting items are the Matilda, 10 shotgun shells, and an egg. All the crows have been replaced with starter enemies, so they weren't too hard to handle. Then we go into the cabin, go through the cutscene, and we're actually greeted by the default enemy that is there after the cutscene, and then take out the rest of the enemies. The rest of the enemies are the same village enemies as usual, with an exception of the bucket dude. I don't know what he's doing, and a few dynamite enemies. Other than that, they're all the same. There are torch villagers awaiting on the other side of the gate, along with dynamite enemies and many chainsaw villagers. I ran around and survived as long as I could while using the dynamite enemies to blow up the chainsaw enemies. All in all, this was a pretty easy area, mostly. After fighting all the villagers, I healed up and walked around the village, picking up all the items in the area. All the items in the village were the same as default as far as I'm aware. After getting all the items, I organized my inventory a bit and then went on to the next area. The first thing we see in the new area are the oh, baby spiders. These 3 spiders were literally the only enemies here for some reason, so after taking them out, I looted the area and continued on. Next, click on the boulder, which is easy. Literally, you can just spam every button on the controller and pass the quick time events in this game. There were at least 10 enemies piled up at the end of the tunnel, and one even had a wheelbarrow floating in midair. I don't know if they replaced the crows or what, but I did what any normal person would do. I threw a grenade at them. But that wasn't the end. There were enemy after enemy after enemy. There were even enemies in the building Lewis was in. I guess they replaced the tripwires or something, because there were like 6 enemies in this building. But finally, we got to Lewis and the end of 1-1. Starting off 1-2, I was immediately terrified because the music was playing, indicating there were enemies coming for me, which doesn't happen right away. There wasn't a normal cutscene for the merchant, only a chainsaw villager that scared the absolute hell out of me. I mean, just look at this. There ended up being 3 chainsaw villagers before I even got to the typewriter. After taking them out, I went on to see what the merchant was selling. I got lucky and the merchant was selling the Red 9, which if you don't know is the best handgun in the game, and you don't actually unlock until a little bit later on in the game. He was also selling the PRL, which I think is a weapon you unlock after beating the game on professional. So I ended up buying the Red 9 and selling the Matilda. I'm not going to bore you too much with this next area because all the enemies are pretty much the same village enemies, just with a few chainsaw, dynamite, and torch enemies just like previously. We finally see some new enemies, which are some late game knights and some dogs. They weren't too hard to take out. I did have to use the 2 grenades that I had. That was pretty much everything new in chapter 1-2. The start of 1-3 was more of the same, minus the merchant selling the mine thrower, which I was not really interested in. The church area actually had some of the cultist enemies from like mid game. They weren't too bad to take out. They just did a lot more damage and their scythes were very annoying. After going into the area where El Gigante usually spawns, I am greeted with a vertigo, which scared the absolute mess out of me. And luckily I dodged his first attack and then was able to get out of there and get to the next area without even getting hit, because he probably would have one-shot me. The next area was just a bunch of chainsaw wielding villagers leading up to the lake monster, which is the only boss in the game that actually isn't changed, so there was nothing special about this. Everything leading up to El Gigante was pretty much boring. The merchant wasn't selling anything new. The first parasite enemy was a chainsaw guy, and the enemies in the area after that were just pitchfork villagers. So the El Gigante boss was actually replaced with a regenerator, which I know is a pretty late game enemy, but he wasn't really difficult because there's a strat where you can just shoot him in the leg, he hits the ground, and then you can knife him to death. And I didn't get it first try, but after like second or third try, I got it, and he went down easy. After saving Ashley, we go to 2-2, which didn't start off too hot, considering every enemy in this area were chainsaw guys, and I actually had my first death here. This whole next area, including the cabin fight, were just the same cultist enemies as before, so there's really nothing new here all the way through chapter 2-2. So after the cabin fight, we end up going right where the El Gigante usually is, who was replaced with Krauser. And with Krauser, it's just like stages of Krauser, so all you have to do is do a certain amount of damage to him, and then he'll throw a flashbang, and then he's completely gone. So after Krauser, we We check out the merchant who's selling nothing new. I bought the stock for the red 9 from him. And then the enemies in this next area were just standard island enemies. But the big cheese boss was completely different. Stage 1 of the big cheese was one of the mega chainsaw guys. So all I knew to do was throw incendiaries and blast him with shotgun bullets. And he actually went down fairly easy. And stage 2 was stage 1 of the big cheese and stage 2 of the big cheese. Here I just relied on various different grenades, like hand grenades and incendiary grenades especially, and the use of the shotgun to take out phase 1 of the big cheese so that I could focus on phase 2. After running around for like 30 minutes avoiding both phase 1 and phase 2 of big cheese, I finally took out phase 1 with my handgun, not knowing that he was already dead. I pumped like an extra 4 handgun bullets in him, but with him all dead, I could focus phase 2 of the big cheese. At this point, I had no more grenades, so I had to rely on my shotgun and my handgun. Luckily, while I was fighting phase 1, I did shoot him a few times with a handgun, so that dwindled him down. So this fight went way faster than the first phase. All right, guys, so I'm going to split this up into like a 4-part series. So I'm going to end off the video here, but if you are enjoying this, be sure to check out the next 3 parts that I come out with, and I'll see you guys next time.